is not enough to propose a new representation of movement. Rather, it is a question of making movement itself a work, substituting direct signs for mediate representations, inventing vibrations, rotations, whirlings, gravitations, dances or leaps which directly touch the mind. The loop is a circle without a centre, or the loop is a continuous edge without a surface. The loop implies movement. How would you know it was a loop unless it looped? Or, at the very least, the loop implies time. You might be on a loop, or a loop might loop past you. Either way, to understand the loop as a loop, you must experience it looping. How do you experience a loop looping? Through repetition. Or more like, through your recognition of repetition. You have to realise the loop is looping for you to experience it as a loop. Experiencing a loop is an experience of sameness. The loop does not present us with similarity. The start of the loop is not similar to the end of the loop. The start of the loop is the same as the end of the loop. The contemporary form of the loop is the GIF. The GIF has particular features, marking out its similarities and differences to its close cousins, the online video and the Vine. 1. The GIF is silent. 2. The GIF autoplays. 3. The GIF loops seamlessly. The GIF's contemporaneity is defined by its difference to the dominant form of contemporary online experience, the feed. That is, the news feed, the timeline, the endless scroll. Whether ordered chronologically or reconfigured by algorithms dedicated to some other non-linear purpose, the feed presents one thing after another. Its hierarchies are crude, as is the analogy with our experience of time. One thing is present, while the previous thing and the next thing hover in the peripheries of our attention, ready to become the past. The feed is a one-way movement. We experience the feed in linear form, and designed as it is for our experiencing of it, it can be described as linear. What can interrupt the feed? What can interrupt the endless linear flow? Because despite assurances by science that time is flat, our experience of the feed is like our experience of time. It is an experience of becoming rather than being. We roll forward through the feed, tumbling down the hill of time, rather than squatting in a moment or sitting in the present. If the feed is flowing and that flow is in one direction, then the opposite of that flow is a loop, and the contemporary form of the loop is that of the GIF. The feed is an endless flow of particular difference, and the GIF is an endless loop of particular sameness. The interruption is one way, however. The GIF can interrupt the feed, but the feed cannot interrupt the GIF. The GIF appears as an arresting sameness in the feed, a hypnotic repetition of sameness. But it cannot be sameness in the way we normally mean sameness, because otherwise we would recognise the repetition not as repetition, but as a single self-same thing. We experience the GIF reproducing sameness over time. The GIF can produce a glimpse of infinity, but is not in fact infinite. What we experience through the GIF is the difference between the finite and the infinite. The GIF requires difference at its core in order to be repetition. The faculty of memory is beaten down by the GIF, forced to experience its own failings in the presence of eternal recurrence. Or the GIF is memory. Through experiencing the GIF, pure mechanical memory confronts subjective remembrance. The experience of the GIF has the capacity to create an affective state that is something to do with death. People have spoken about the GIF's capacity for creepiness, and I would push further and say that the best GIFs are not just creepy, but uncanny. Uncanny in the original sense of Freud's unheimlich, which means unhomely. The unheimlich is the opposite of what is familiar. But through this opposition, the unheimlich relates directly to what is familiar. The unheimlich is both horrifyingly other and yet recognizable enough to be familiar. The ultimate unheimlich thing is the corpse, a dead human body, a body that has abjected its livingness, and yet remains recognizable as having once had life. The unheimlich also has a connection to humor, how a funny thing repeated can become terrifying. Henri Bergson's ideas of comedy can help us here. He said, something mechanical in the living is necessarily comic. He was describing the humour in watching a human lose its agency. But, through their own mechanical repetition, GIFs exemplify this loss of agency, this compulsion to repeat. And what about our compulsion to repeat? The compulsion, on our part, to watch the GIF again and again. This compulsion can be understood in two ways. Through Bergson's theory, it could be said to serve a social function, understanding the failure of the person in the GIF in order to not do what they have done. But, with Freud's death drive in mind, our compulsion to watch the living become mechanical could be understood as being an underlying desire to return to the pre-subjective state of non-living, non-thinking from which we came. The most hypnotic GIFs are those that focus on a single movement. As the choreographer Hamish McPherson has said, some of the images that lend themselves to perfect loops and therefore to GIFs, fire, a stream, people walking in circles, are also, unsurprisingly, things that are traditionally connected to meditation and ritual. As I said at the beginning, the feed is an endless flow of particular difference, and the GIF is an endless loop of particular sameness. The GIF's focus on a single action allows you to meditate on that action and begin to comprehend the action in full. Or, more like, it allows you to conceive of what it would be to totally comprehend a single action. Of course, this is not possible. There is no adequate translation of empirical data into concept. There is always a remainder in representation, and there is no total comprehension. The GIF reveals the gap between the finite and the infinite. As Deleuze says, its difference is inscribed in its repetition. The GIF reveals the gap between the finite amount of comprehension you can have and the possibility of infinite or total comprehension. The affective state produced by watching a GIF must be related to this gap, the gap between the finite and the infinite, and the gap between what we can comprehend and what we can conceive of comprehending. The short loop of the GIF can link Freud's interpretation of the compulsion to repeat as relating to the death drive, and Kant's idea of the sublime, formless object that produces an awareness of the limits of our reason. Is there a kind of primary masochism at work when we become absorbed in the GIF? We are driven to repeat the experience of our own incomprehension again and again and again. We watch them fall, over and over. With each loop, we fail to grasp the full. The gap never closes. The loop never stops. It is not enough to propose a new representation of movement. Rather, it is a question of making movement itself a work, substituting direct signs for mediate representations, inventing vibrations, rotations, whirlings, gravitations, dances or leaps which directly touch the mind.